Colleagues to support this measure, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. Gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Barletta.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Chairman Barletta. Thank you, Ranking Member Johnson. And I'd like to also look over this House floor and thank my colleague, Ms. Bustos from Illinois, for joining me in this effort. Because if you travel to my district or Ms. Bustos' district in central and in my case, southern Illinois, and you ask my constituents about their opinion of FEMA's disaster declaration process, they're going to tell you that it's broken. You don't have to look any further than the state of Illinois to see how FEMA's public assistance formula is failing hardworking families across this country, because it simply does not put all communities on a level playing field. In 2012, tornadoes devastated Harrisburg in southern Illinois, but the state was denied public assistance while Missouri and Kentucky received aid due to the damage inflicted by the exact same storm. Just a few short years ago, the towns of Gifford and Washington in central Illinois were denied public assistance as well, despite those communities suffering millions in damage. And just last year, Illinois was once again denied public assistance following extensive damage in late December 2015 and early January of 2016 caused by severe storms and flooding in the central and southern parts of our state. Under existing regulations, FEMA currently takes into account several factors when determining the need for public and individual assistance. However, there is currently no standard to determine which factor is more important than another during the disaster declaration process. This leads to highly subjective and uncertain processes that leave states and communities in limbo for weeks as their application is considered. By working with the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee last year, during the markup of the FEMA Disaster Assistance Reform Act, we were successful in including important language based on legislation I introduced that requires the administrator of FEMA, when making recommendations to the President regarding a disaster declaration, to give greater weight and consideration to severe local impact. This bill ultimately passed out of the House under suspension last Congress, but unfortunately the bill died in the Senate. This Congress, I've introduced this language, again, along with my friend and colleague from Illinois, Ms. Bustos, as the Disaster Declaration Improvement Act. Passing this bill will have a real impact on states like Illinois, where a large portion of the population is concentrated in a small northeastern corner of our state. Because of the population density in the northern part of my state, rural parts where I live, where I represent, they are having to meet an arbitrarily high standard and in order to qualify for a disaster declaration. Enacting this language is going to help level the playing field, help ensure rural areas are given a fair chance when disaster happens and when help is needed. During our March markup of this bill, we also added important language that strengthens the bill by way of an amendment offered by my friend from Louisiana, Mr. Garrett Graves. This language also requires FEMA to place more consideration on recent multiple disasters to take into account the cumulative impact such events can have. And so I want to thank Chairman Graves for working with my office on including this language and for being a co-sponsor of my bill. I also want to express my personal gratitude to Chairman Schuster and Ranking Member DeFazio for working with us during the last Congress and this Congress and for moving this bill so early. And again, I want to especially thank Chairman Barletta for being a co-sponsor of this bill. Mr. Speaker, central and southern Illinois just experienced another flooding event this past weekend, and while it's not yet clear what the damage is, it's clear that Congress must act to ensure that folks get a fair shake if it is determined that federal assistance is needed. I urge a yes vote, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Barletta, reserves his time. Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield to the gentle lady.